You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium from Hinckley Community Radio, a non-profit podcast radio station. Tonight's episode is about the Sasquatch. So it's over to you, Mark.
Sasquatch is a large, hairy, human-like biped creature claimed by some to inhabit the forests of North America. He, or she of course, is also known to go by other names, including the skunk ape in Florida, the grassman in Ohio, the folk monster in Arkansas, the wood booger in Virginia, and a whole host of other names, but the most common names used are either Sasquatch or Bigfoot. For the sake of this podcast, I will stick to the name Sasquatch, unless of course I am referring to someone else's opinion or point of view. Sasquatch is often described as being a large, muscular, bipedal human or ape-like creature covered in either black, dark brown, dark reddish, or even in some colder climate areas, white or light grey hair. Its height is estimated to be roughly between 6 to 9 feet, or 1.8 to 2.7 metres tall. However, there are some people who would describe Sasquatch as standing as tall as 10 to 15 feet, or 3 to 4.6 metres tall. Sasquatch is featured in both American and Canadian folklore, and since the mid-20th century has grown to be a cultural icon and has become the subject of its own distinct subculture. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in again and listening to this giant hairy episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a psychic medium, a ufologist, and a guy who firmly believes that we are living in a matrix. I mean, what other reason is there for all my money to keep disappearing? In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the mystery surrounding the Sasquatch. And this week's necessary disclaimer. I think it's pretty safe to say that this story is a family-friendly episode, so sit back and enjoy yourself. But of course, please remember that you do listen to this podcast at your own discretion, and that all opinions and comments are strictly my own. However, the facts of this episode still remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly, although my Sasquatchian is pretty spot on. Anyway, let's get back to the story. The term Sasquatch among the indigenous nations simply means wild man or hairy man. The Starlies people, who are also known as the Kahalis, an indigenous people from the lower mainland region of British Columbia in Canada, tell stories of a very strange shape-shifting creature called a Sasquatch. They claim that this Sasquatch creature protects the forest, and that the same Sasquatch is just an angelised version of the name Sasquatch. Yeah, I can see that. The Starlies people's culture is said to have a strong bond with the Sasquatch, believing them to be creatures that can move between the physical and spiritual realms. The term Bigfoot, however, has a very different story behind it. In 1958, a Mr. Jerry Crew, a bulldozer operator for a logging company in Humboldt County in California, discovered a large set of human-like footprints that were sunk deep within the mud in the Six Rivers National Forest. They measured about 16 inches in length, or 410 millimetres long. Upon Jerry Crew's discovery, he thought it best to inform his co-workers of this strange find. However, much to his surprise, his work colleagues also claimed to have seen similar tracks on previous job sites. And not only that, but Jerry Crew's fellow workers also informed him of various other odd incidents that were happening around other logging areas. One example is that a 450 pounds or 200 kilogram oil drum that was full at the time had been moved around the working area without any explanation. So the workers at the Humboldt County Logging Company soon began using the term Bigfoot to describe this apparent culprit. Of course, at first the men at the logging company initially believed that someone was playing a prank on them. However, after observing more of these giant footprints around the job site, Jerry Crew decided to contact a reporter from the local Humboldt Times newspaper by the name of Andrew Genzoli. Andrew Genzoli then interviewed the Humboldt County lumber workers about what they had witnessed and wrote various articles about the mysterious footprints, thus introducing the term Bigfoot to the world in relation to the tracks and the local tales of large, hairy, wild men. As some form of evidence, a plaster cast was made of one of the giant footprints, and the logging crew appeared in a photo holding one of the casts on the front page of the 6th of October 1958 edition of the Humboldt Times newspaper. The story of this giant footprint spread far and wide as the reporter Andrew Genzoli began to receive correspondence from major media outlets. These included the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. And so, as a result, the term Bigfoot became widespread and known as a reference to an apparently large, unknown creature that was leaving giant footprints in the Northern California area, with places like Willow Creek and Humboldt County now being considered as the Bigfoot capitals of the world. There is, of course, a little more to the Jerry Crew's 1958 Humboldt County Logging Company story. In 2002, the family of one of Jerry Crew's deceased co-workers, a guy going by the name of Ray Wallace, revealed in his basement a collection of large carved wooden feet. Because that's what we all keep in our basements, don't we? Anyway, the family stated that the deceased worker, Ray Wallace, had been secretly making these footprints and that he was responsible for the tracks discovered by Jerry Crew back in 1958. Apparently, Ray Wallace was inspired by another Sasquatch hoaxer named Rant Mullins, who revealed information about his own hoaxes back in 1982. The Rant Mullins story goes that in the 1930s in Toledo, Washington, Ray Wallace and a group of other foresters decided to carve pairs of large feet made out of wood and to use these carvings to create giant footprints in the mud. This elaborate hoax was done in order to scare the huckleberry pickers in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. This group of Sasquatch hoaxers went on to also claim to be responsible for hoaxing the alleged 8 Canyon incident back in 1924. On an interesting side note, 8 Canyon is a gorge on Mount St. Helens that was the site of a violent encounter in the July of 1924 between a group of miners and a group of ape men. The incident was reported on the 16th of July 1924 in an issue of the Oregonian newspaper. According to the story that was widely run at the time, the 5 miners were asleep when the attack started. Thankfully, all the miners survived the attack, but they were all convinced that they were attacked by 8 men. Ray Wallace, who was also from Toledo, knew Ramp Mullins, and so he started to collaborate with him in order to obtain a pair of the large wooden feet, and then used them himself to create large footprints on the 1958 Humboldt County construction site as a means to scare away any potential trespassers and thieves. Personally, I would have used a guard dog. Anyway, after this first short break, in part 2, we will look at more of the history and even some of the folklore regarding the Sasquatch.
This show is brought to you courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for guided tours of the haunted rooms at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times, and over 16s only, please, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could and has taken place at any time. Some areas and particular objects or items can be quite scary and unnerving. Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective offers. And why not download the app, available on both iOS and Android, for only $3.99 to keep up to date with what is coming up at the centre.
An ecologist named Robert Pyle has argued that most cultures around the world have accounts of human-like giants in their own folk history, expressing the need for, and I quote, some larger-than-life creatures. He also states that each language that is spoken around the world has its own name for a similar type of creature featured as their own local versions of such legends, and that most of the names mean something like wild man or hairy man. It is said that in many European folklore tales, instances of the wild man of the woods, or if we're going to go gender neutral, wild people, are often described as being, and I quote, a naked creature covered in hair with only the face, feet and hands remaining bare. It has also been claimed that most of these wild people of European folklore range from being either human hermits to human-like monsters. The North American myths of these wild people is still very persistent, and documented sightings that have been reported in what is now the New York State and Pennsylvania. Many of these indigenous cultures across the North American continent include tales of mysterious hair-covered creatures living in woods or forests. According to the anthropologist David Daling, these myths and legends have existed since long before any of the contemporary reports of the creature that have been described as the Sasquatch. He also claims that these myths and legends differ in their detail both regionally and between families in the same community. So let's take a look at a few of these old legends regarding possible Sasquatch sightings. According to the author Kathy Moskowitz-Strain, who wrote the 2008 book Giants, Cannibals, Monsters, Bigfoot in Native Culture, there stands on the Tool River Indian Reservation petroglyphs, or images carved in the rocks that were created by a tribe of Yakults at a site called Painted Rock, estimating these carvings to be at least 1,000 years old. Also, according to Kathy Strain, these petroglyphs depict a group of Bigfoots called the Family, with the largest petroglyph being called Hairy Man. Parenting Yakults used to warn their children not to venture near the river at night, or they may encounter the creature. In 1975, according to the Tulare County Board of Education, they claimed, and I quote,
Bigfoot, the hairy man, was a creature that was like a great big giant with long shaggy hair. His long shaggy hair made him look like an animal. He was good in a way because he ate the animals that might harm people.
In the 16th century, Spanish explorers and Mexican settlers both used to tell tales of the Los Vigilantes Oscuros, or otherwise known as the Dark Watchers, which were very large creatures alleged to stalk their camps at night. And in 1721, a Jesuit priest who was living with the Natchez, a Native American people who lived in the region that is now known as Mississippi, reported stories of hairy creatures in the forest known to scream loudly and steal livestock. Also, the folklore of the Cherokee includes tales of the Salkalu that were described as being slant-eyed giants that resided in the Apacalanian Mountains, and is also, although only sometimes, associated with Bigfoot. Along the Pacific Northwest region of the Washington state, members of the Lummi, or Lumi, tell tales about creatures known as the Semequis. A very quick interesting side note here, the Lumi, who are also known as the People of the Sea, are a Native American tribe of the Coast Salish Ethnolinguistic group. I hope I've got that right. Ethnolinguistic group. There you go. Sorry about it. These stories that the Lummi or Lumi tell are similar to each other in the general descriptions of the Semequis. However, some details do differ among various family accounts concerning the creature's diet and activity. Some regional variations sometimes tell us of more threatening creatures. For example, the Stayaha or the Kui-Kaiwa, who were a nocturnal race of people, warned their children against ever saying the names of the creatures, because if they did, it would come and carry them off to be killed. And the Iroquois, who are an Iroquoian-speaking confederacy of native northeast North America, tell of an aggressive hair-covered giant with rock-hard skin known as the Otneyarhe, or the stone giant of Genosqa. Genosqua? Sounds about right.
Yeah.
In 1847, artist Paul Kane reported stories from the natives about the Skookums, who were a race of cannibalistic wild men living on the peak of Mount St. Helens, located in Skamania County, Washington. On a short, interesting side note here, Paul Kane was an Irish-born Canadian painter, famous for his paintings of First Nations people in the Canadian West and other Native Americans in the Columbia District. And in the US, President Theodore Roosevelt, in Roosevelt's book in 1893, called The Wilderness Hunter, he tells a story that he was told by an elderly mountain man called Bauman, in which a foul-smelling bipedal creature ransacked his beaver-trapping camp, stalked him, and later became hostile when it fatally broke his travelling companion's neck. The Alutiiq of the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska tell of a Bigfoot-like creature called the Nantinaq, and it has also been reported that this Alaskan killer Bigfoot was responsible for the decreased population in the abandoned town of Portlock in the 1940s. Sasquatch and Bigfoot proponents Grover Krantz and Jeffrey H. Bourne both believed that the cryptid in question could be a relict population, meaning an organism that was more widespread and diverse in the past, of the extinct Southeast Asian ape species Gigantopithecus blacki. According to Jeffrey Bourne, the Gigantopithecus blacki may have followed the many other species of animals that migrated across the Bering Land Bridge to the Americas. The Bering Land Bridge, or Beringia, is defined today as the land and maritime area bounded on the west by Lena River in Russia and on the east by the Mackenzie River in Canada. Despite all these theories regarding the Gigantopithecus blacki, to date no Gigantopithecus fossils has ever been found in Americas. And in Asia, the only fossil that have been found are the fossils of mandibles and teeth, which leaves uncertainty about the Gigantopithecus blacki's location. Grover Krantz has argued that the Gigantopithecus blacki could have been bipedal, based on his own exploration from the shape of its own mandible. However, unfortunately, the relevant part of the mandible to confirm this theory is not present in any of the fossils that have been found. After this second short break, in part 3, we will look at some of the modern-day sightings of Sasquatch and the Patterson-Gimlin film footage dating back from the October of 1967.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues, All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
There are, of course, many claims regarding the origins and characteristics of Sasquatch. They include things like Sasquatch is an extraterrestrial, a psychic, a shapeshifter, connected to UFOs, and is even said to be able to cross into different dimensions. Additional claims regarding Sasquatch have been linked with conspiracy theories and government cover-ups. According to the Live Science website, there have been over 10,000 reported Sasquatch sightings in the continental United States, with 1/3 of all these claims being located in the Pacific Northwest, and the remaining reported sightings are spread throughout the rest of North America. However, most of these reports are considered either mistakes or hoaxes, even by cryptid researchers who claim that Bigfoot exists. There are some Bigfoot researchers who claim that for communication purposes and territorial displays, Sasquatch will throw rocks, while other methods of communicating include audible blows struck against trees, otherwise known as wood knocking. And additionally, structures of broken and twisted foliage seemingly placed in a specific area have also been attributed by some to be Sasquatch behaviour. Some Sasquatch researchers and enthusiasts believe that Bigfoot constructs teepee-like structures out of dead trees and foliage. There are, of course, skeptics who would argue that all these behaviours can be easily hoaxed. And although it pains me to say it, they're probably right. So let's have a look at some of the modern day sightings of this elusive cryptid. In 1971, in Folk, Arkansas, a family reported that a large, hairy covered creature startled a woman after reaching through a window. This alleged incident caused mass hysteria in the Folk area, and although it was later deemed a hoax, it did inspire the 1972 horror movie, The Legend of Boggy Creek. In 1974, the New York Times presented what was called a dubious tale of a Canadian prospector called Albert Osman, claiming that in 1924 he was kidnapped and held captive by a family of Bigfoot for 6 days. The story goes something like this. In 1924, lumberjack and woodsman Albert Osman decided to go to the forest for what he felt was some much needed vacation time. Albert Osman had heard many tales and stories about the man-beasts who were said to be roaming these woods, but being the hard-edged woodsman that he was, refused to believe in such tall tales. However, one evening, as he lay sleeping in his small one-man tent, a Sasquatch came into his abode and purportedly picked him up and then carried him off while he was still in his sleeping bag. According to Albert Osman, the Sasquatch then carried him, whilst he was still in the sleeping bag, across the country for about 3 hours and then dropped him down on the plateau. When Albert Osman opened his eyes, he saw standing around him a family of 4 cryptids, with each one looking like various sizes of a Sasquatch, reporting that one of the Bigfoots was at least 8 feet tall. He felt that this was possibly one Sasquatch family, as they appeared, to him at least, to look like 2 adults and 2 children, which held him captive for about a week. Albert Osman decided not to use his gun, as it appeared to him that they meant him no harm. In fact, if anything, they seemed to have spent the week looking after him. They cared for him by feeding him sweet-tasting grass, and from what he noticed during his apecation, get it? Apecation? No? Okay, never mind. From what he noticed, the female Sasquatch appeared to be washing and stacking leaves. Perhaps she was making him a place to rest. I don't know. But, like all good things, they must eventually come to an end. So Albert Osman escaped his captivity by making the large male Sasquatch groggy by feeding him some snuff. It was more than 24 years until Albert Osman told his story to the world. Why? Simply because if he had told anyone sooner about what had happened to him all those years ago, the world would have labelled him as being insane. I think it's safe to say that he probably felt more confident to tell his story later, quite simply because more and more Sasquatch stories were coming to light. And of course, I can't really do a podcast called Sasquatch without mentioning the Patterson-Gimlin Sasquatch film footage, can I?
No.
So, here goes. The Patterson-Gimlin film, which is also known as the Patterson film or the PGF, is an American short motion picture of an unidentified subject that the filmmakers have said was a Bigfoot. The footage was shot on the Friday of the 20th of October 1967 in the east bank of Bluff Creek, a tributary of the Klamath River in Northern California. The filmmakers were Roger Patterson and Robert Bob Gimlin. The story goes that at some time between 1:15 and 1:40 p.m, whilst riding on horseback, both men came to a very large overturned tree with a huge root system at a turn in the creek. It was at this point that the 2 men spotted a figure about 25 feet ahead in front of them. Bob Gimlin claims it was, and I quote, "crouching beside the creek to their left." Bob Gimlin also later described himself as in a mild state of shock after first seeing the figure. Roger Patterson initially estimated the creature's height to be at least 6 feet 6 inches to 7 feet tall, but later raised his estimate to be about 7 feet 6 inches tall. The film itself shows what Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin claimed was a large, hairy, bipedal ape-like figure with short, silvery brown or black, dark reddish-brown hair covering most of his body, including its prominent breasts. The figure walks away from them to a distance of about 120 feet before Roger Patterson begins to run after it. At that point, the figure glances over its right shoulder at the men, and Roger Patterson falls to his knees. In a later interview with Bigfoot researcher John Green, Roger Patterson would later characterise the creature's expression as one of, and I quote, "contempt and disgust. You know how it is when the umpire tells you one more word and you're out of the game? Well, that's how it felt." On an interesting side note here, John Green was a Canadian journalist and a leading researcher of the Bigfoot phenomena. He was a graduate of both the University of British Columbia and Columbia University, and compiled a database of more than 3,000 sightings and track reports of this elusive cryptid. If you type Patterson and Gimlin Bigfoot footage into YouTube, you can see for yourselves what the two guys saw. And although the resulting film is initially quite shaky, it does clear up a little when Roger Patterson gets closer to the figure. See what you think. Anyway, to continue with the story. After the guys filmed all they could, Bob Gimlin then remounted and followed the figure on horseback, while at the same time keeping a safe distance until it disappeared around a bend in the road. It was at this point that Roger Patterson called his fellow traveller back, as he was starting to feel a little vulnerable on foot and without his rifle. But not only that, if this figure really was Bigfoot, he feared that the creature's mate might come looking for him. From all the reports, this entire cryptid encounter had actually only lasted for less than 2 minutes. Sadly, Roger Patterson died of cancer in 1972. However, he maintained right to the very end of his life that the creature on the film was real. Bob Gimlin has always denied being involved in any part of a hoax with Roger Patterson, or in fact anyone else. From at least the early 1970s, apart from a couple of rare appearances, Bob Gimlin avoided most of the publicity when it came to discussing the subject of the Patterson film. That was at least until around 2005, when he began giving interviews and appearing at Bigfoot conventions. For decades, the exact location of the site was lost, primarily because of the regrowth of the foliage in the stream bed after a flood back in 1964. However, it was rediscovered in 2011 south of a north-running segment of the creek, informally known as the Bowling Alley. Over the years, the Patterson film footage has since been subjected to many attempts of both authenticating and debunking. Bigfoot has had a huge impact in popular culture, with the Smithsonian Magazine declaring in 2018 that, and I quote,
"Interest in the existence of the creature is now at an all-time high."
In 1969, in Skamania County, in the US state of Washington, a law was passed making killing a Bigfoot punishable by a felony conviction, resulting in a monetary fine of up to $10,000 or a 5-year imprisonment. However, in 1984, the law was amended to a misdemeanor and the entire county of Washington was declared a Sasquatch refuge. And in 1991, Whatcom County followed suit, declaring that the county was also now a Sasquatch protection and refuge area. In 2022, Grays Harbor County, again in Washington, passed a similar resolution after a local elementary school in Hoquiam submitted a classroom project asking for a Sasquatch protection and refuge area to be granted. And in 2021, a US representative named Justin Humphrey, in an effort to bolster the tourism, proposed an official Bigfoot hunting season in Oklahoma, putting forward the idea that the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation could not only regulate its permits, but the state would offer $3 million to the person who caught the creature alive and unharmed. On a last note regarding Sasquatch, during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, Bigfoot became a part of many North American social distancing promotion campaigns, with the creature being referred to as the social distancing champion.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 92, we are going to be looking at the Cock Lane Ghost. The Cock Lane Ghost was a purported haunting that attracted mass public attention back in 1762. The location was a lodging in Cock Lane, a short road adjacent to London's Smithfield Market, and a few minutes' walk from St Paul's Cathedral. The event centred on 3 people: William Kent, a usurer from Norfolk, Richard Parsons, a parish clerk, and Parsons' daughter, Elizabeth.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. The pronunciation, as usual, of all the names of places, though, was all mine. The actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes and Denise Poolar, with special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley. And, of course, a big thank you to everyone for listening. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember, guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. This show and all its contents are covered by the basic copyright of Mark the Medium.